Skip Rutherford, Dean Rutherford couldn't make it this morning. He's at the legislature, so he sends his regrets. This is the last day to pass bills. And
We send him our regrets.
yeah, so yeah, we do. Yeah, definitely. Please be reminded of that. But he wanted to be here, but he asked me to introduce our guest speaker today, Ambassador Koomson, instead. Ambassador Koomson spoke here last year. I think it was in the first semester, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
November.
That's right. Yeah, he's one of our first distinguished speakers, and we had a really good conversation. He was a really great speaker and very helpful with our students. So we're lucky to have him back today. He's actually in town with the dean of the business school, Hugh Sherman at UALR. So thank you, Mr. Sherman, for coming to class today. Koby Koomson served as the Ghanaian ambassador from the U.S. to the U.S. from 1997 to 2001. From 1988 to 1997, he was the president and CEO of Koomson Financial, a tax accounting and management consulting firm in LA. Ambassador Koomson has also served on several boards of NGOs, including the Ghana Development Fund as the president, the American Lung Association, the LA chapter as a treasurer, also the Los Angeles Mayor's Office of Economic Development and Rebuild Los Angeles. Another interesting thing about Ambassador Koomson is he played a key role in the passage of the African Trade Bill, which was signed by President Clinton in 2000. So I'm sure several of us have heard of that. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask you, ambassadors, to speak for about 10, 15 minutes or so about whatever you like and what you're doing now. And then we'll just open it up for questions from the students. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kennedy. Thank you all for coming. Let me say a big thank you to this great institution that happens to come about as a result of President Clinton establishing his presidential library here in Little Rock, Arkansas. As Patrick said, this is my second time. I'm delighted to be welcomed back, and I'm delighted to have all of you here. We're going to have a very spirited exchange. I will speak for about 10 minutes or so, and then I believe whatever I don't cover, I'm sure you have lots and lots of questions that you will want to ask me. As part of the program that brings me here, when I start talking about African issues, I say that there are no sacred grounds, because I believe we have to be very candid when it comes to talking about Africa's economic problems and opportunities, so that I would only leave any stone unturned. But before I start, let me say a big thank you to Dean Sherman, who's the Dean of Business School. Those of you who don't know, who've not been Dean, would you please stand so that they recognize you?
Good morning.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for bringing me here this morning. We'll go straight to the purpose why I'm here. As Patrick said, I served as an ambassador from Ghana to the U.S. from 1997, October, until January 2001. I have lived in America for almost 33 years. I arrived in America in 1974 in Los Angeles, and 6 months later, I found myself in Little Rock, Arkansas. That's where my roots began. And my umbilical cord, I believe, to America is tightly connected to this city and to this state. I strongly believe that how I ended up being molded and becoming what I am and who I am is due to the many, many friends and many families that actually took me under their wings, including my pastor, Reverend Walker, to a very good friend, and indeed my mentor, Paul Berry, who I admire tremendously for all the things that he's done for me, and countless number of families, Mrs. Wilford, and all those people who've made me who I am today. So for that reason, I'm always going to be committed to the city and to the state, and that's what brings me here. The reason why I'm here is I have made a recommendation to the school after the school gave me an award in 2005 as a distinguished alumni to give back. And to give back, among the things that I was doing was pushing the African economic agenda in America. Having lived there for this length of time and knowing that many people in this country, I thought of doing it in Washington, D.C. But then I asked myself, everything is in Washington, D.C. So lawyers, lobbyists, government officials, the real thrust of America's economic power and America's economic might is outside Washington, D.C. And I couldn't select any other place other than Little Rock, Arkansas. And for that reason, the program will entail simply that it will be a very engaging center that will bring African heads of states, invite African heads of states, invite African business leaders, invite African ministers of commerce, trade, finance, tourism, anything that relates with business, and bring African ambassadors in Washington to come to Little Rock, to the university, and engage the business community in America. We will invite them from all over the country, especially the businesses that are doing business in a particular country, that an ambassador comes here, so that that businessman or businesswoman will have an opportunity to dialogue directly with the ambassador, or in this case, the head of state. There will be no long speeches. It will all be round table, and at that table, all titles will be checked outside the door, so that now it becomes a candid discussion as to what is it that we must do to increase the lifestyle and the overall well-being of the people in Africa. Let me give you some very troubling statistics. Out of 30 poorest, least developed nations in the world, 30 out of 40 least developed nations in the world are in Africa. We have 53 countries on the continent. And 30 out of 53 is very abysmal. The total economy of sub-Saharan Africa is about the same as that of Belgium. And per capita income ranges anywhere from about $300, in some cases less than $300, to maybe $400 or $500 a year. Just imagine how much money you spend in a month. And that becomes, that amount being some families' whole annual income. We know the pandemic HIV/AIDS, which has decimated, the economies, which has done major harm to most countries on the continent. We hear about the issue of corruption on the continent. Now, these are issues that are not friendly to investment. Of course, when you talk about corruption, you have a corruptee and a corruptor. Someone has to pass the brown envelope. But from our perspective, we believe that if it's adversely affecting us, then we have to find ways to deal with that. Other countries may do the same thing, but we're not other countries. What we're doing is because we are so far behind the 8th ball and so far at the bottom of the pyramid that we have to find a way to solve the problems affecting the continent. Especially a continent that has some of the world's best riches in the world. The estimates are in about 5 years or so, about 20% of US's oil imports will come from Africa. In about 5 years or so. Now that's a huge. And that's why the US is developing special relationship with African countries. We believe that more must and should happen. But before that happens, then you have to put your house in order. That's why we want to have this kind of discussion. A continent that is endowed with riches from mineral oil, from mineral wealth, to rivers that can literally, if well channeled, can help grow food and feed the continent. Major rivers on the continent. So sources of water. Yet, good drinking water is a problem on the continent. We talk about Africa's capital flight. The estimates are somewhere around between 25 to 35% of Africa's savings are in banks outside Africa. Now, you know and I know that if the money is not, we're talking about foreign exchange, if the money is not in the continent, in Africa, that means the continent has to borrow. If the money was in African banks, then these banks can make loans to small, medium-sized enterprises, can make loans to large companies, and as loans have been made, companies can increase their capacity, they can employ people, so now you have the circulation of money that supports purchasing power. So now the Africans can, buy more refrigerators, more vehicles, more homes. But where there's capital flight that adversely affects the continent's economic activity, these are issues that must be candidly discussed. Nobody's discussing it because sometimes it's not a comfortable issue. Meanwhile, better than 99.9% of the over 800 million people are living in what is considered not desirable. A few people are doing well, but the masses are not. And we know what happens when eventually the masses become fed up with the system. We don't want to get to that level. And not to get to that level, I believe the time is long overdue for us to begin to have serious engagement of economic issues that will uplift the continent. We have crisis on the continent. Now most of those areas are doing well. Classic example, Liberia is a classic example. We're delighted to have a woman president. And frankly, I believe that the continent must promote more women in politics. They can't do worse than what's going on. Let's be candid. Let's be candid. You see, we need more women in politics. We need more women in business. And the only way to begin to make that is to have candid discussions that also call for accountability. At the conference that I had moderated in South Africa last October, it became apparent that other than South Africa, no African country has a credit bureau. The title of the conference was Credit Reporting in Africa, other than South Africa. We know, you know and I know, that the credit bureaus that are established in the US help facilitate movement of money, trade, commerce, and transaction. Because the borrower, the businessman, the purchaser, that help facilitate the growth within the economy must be able the system must be able to say that you have a credit history that qualifies you to be given a loan. Why? Because you don't have the money. But based on your credit history, a financial institution will give you money because you are a responsible person who pays your money, who will pay the loan on time. The banks will feel comfortable to make loans to the businessman, to the consumer, because there's a mechanism in place that dictates that the money that they collected from their depositors will not be at risk if they lend that money to that businessman or to that consumer. And it's because firm regulations are in place to govern both borrower and lenders' activities. We don't have that in most countries on the continent. As a result, it's cash and carry. Cash and carry, from the last time I knew, was several years, several decades ago in most developed countries. Cash and carry does not create a robust economic activity. So that conference looked at the problems associated with the financial infrastructure, i.e. credit. And I'm delighted to report that a number of countries have now embraced this concept. They were already working on it. But it is now being highlighted to the many representatives who came. These are bank supervisors, people from central bank governors' offices, from bank examiners, from commercial bank CEOs and presidents, from the few credit bureaus we have on the continent, mostly from South Africa, and one from Kenya. Out of 53 countries, only one at that time had a recognizable credit bureau. How do you move trade? As Patrick said, we worked to pass the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which President Clinton signed in 2000. But if you have all these mechanisms in place to facilitate your trade and commerce dealing with the global community, and your house is not in order, then absolutely, it's worthless. You will have some successes, but these successes are going to be very measured, as opposed to broad-basing it to make it intergenerational. How do you create that intergenerational wealth? It will come from discussing these very candid issues. And frankly, I believe, because anytime a president comes, they're always in Washington. As I say in my discussions, in my speeches, you find them oftentimes cooped up in their hotels. They'll have speaking engagements, they go to dinners, they go to receptions to meet businessmen. But in terms of real candid discussions that takes away the element of fear, the element of, wow, this is sacred ground we can't discuss. Because at the end of the day, our leaders are there to serve us, the people. That's why we've entrusted them with this responsibility of leading us. And it's high time we begin to ask them questions. Not to accuse them unfairly, but to ask them genuine questions and help them and direct them, where possible, in areas that will improve the lives of the people on the continent. Every time you look on television and you see a kid with flies on his face, where did that kid come from? Some country in Africa. Why do we have so many NGOs in Africa? Compared to the number of the growth of private sector and entrepreneurship. As I said in the speech I gave at the UN about 4 or 5 years ago, we don't need aid. What we need is trade. Because aid makes you very dependent and trade makes you independent. And I believe the people are ready. The leadership is ready. It's up to us now to bring the two together and say, well, can we have a dialogue? A meaningful dialogue with the business community. So now, rather than have this capital flight, those with money in Africa can come to the table and say, well, rather than putting my money in a European bank, assuming that you got the money legally, that money begins to support the development of the private sector, because the money will be in the bank, the banks or the financial institutions will be comfortable enough to loan the monies to the private sector, which then employs people, which makes it possible for those people they employ to be able to buy those merchandise that grow the economy. That's the message that I've been carrying. When I was in Madagascar just 2 weeks ago, the issue was along the same lines. How do we support a robust microfinance system? I have my own ideas and I share it with them. I asked the question, where in the world has small and medium-sized companies been given $100 and created a robust economy? Where in the world has a developed economy come out and say that we had a microfinance system and the small and medium-sized companies were given $100, $200, and it created a robust economy? We have to look at what minimums we can make available. Is it 5,000? Is it 10,000? Is it 20,000? These monies are not given directly to them for them to use for social issues. But what we also do, we have to do, is in addition to providing the money, we also provide them with the critical skill sets
of bankers, of lawyers, of MBAs, of engineers, of IT professionals, of marketing people that the countries are already producing out of the universities, for which most of them probably will end up going outside the country. You engage them to become mentors, to become support mechanisms, so that if you gave a small and medium-sized enterprise company, say $10,000, that money is not going to be given to that entrepreneur, but the support skill sets that will be identified to support that business will determine when do we buy new merchandise, when do we buy new equipment, when do we buy this, so that that money actually goes into direct use rather than being given to the businessman, or not that they're not responsible, they will manage well. But you also want to provide them with the necessary tools along with the money that can guide them. Give them good management support. Give them individuals that will help them reach out to the global market so they can become competitive. These are the issues that we discussed in China, and we talked about the establishment of a fund, of an Africa-based fund that will support the microfinance system. And if I'm on that fund committee, among the things we'll do, certainly we'll do the roadshow and find the money. But we'll also have the skill sets who are individuals from the country, from that region, from that district, from that town, who may have that skill set. And they'll get paid because there's no free lunch. You have to motivate a person to be able to work for a cause. These are the issues that will be discussed candidly, so that we will know and have benchmarks. Are we making success? If we're not making any success, at what point do we have to change? Have the flexibility to meaningfully say that, yes, we need to do it this way, we need to do it that way. This is the mission that we are on now. I think I've spoken for maybe about 15 to let's say 16 minutes. And we'll be delighted to take questions on issues that I may not have covered. Yes.
I have an issue about, you've covered some areas that me personally, but I want to ask this question from an angle of what do we do with our youth who are being locked out of being access to finances. I'll give you an example of myself. I would not be able to get jobs because every job criteria would ask, are you 35 plus 50, like that for the age, or have you work experience before to even qualify for a job? So I would be locked out of the job market, so and not get any pay. And when I started my own business, I would not get any credit or loans because of my age, or I don't have property. So even opening a bank account, I ended up having to go, say I'm a small farmer attached to my mother to open an account. And here you can just walk to the bank and get an account, so the capital like I'm part of that. And then the other aspect also of having a business, I've had a business since I was 10 years old, every now and then, but it's not registered because, again, to register you have to show where is your account, where is your premises. Again, so it's a catch-22 situation. How do we solve that? Because I know I'm not the only person in Africa.
Very excellent question. The reason, one of the things we discussed in Cape Town, South Africa last October on the credit bureau issue is exactly what we're talking about. There's a very large segment of African population that is made up of the youth. Sooner or later, the youth will become restless because they watch television, they watch CNN, they watch MTV, they watch the one where they sell things on home shopping, okay? And then they see their counterparts in America, in Europe, in Japan, in China, in Korea, in parts of South America, their counterparts of the same age group, having the things that they see on television that they don't have. Sooner or later they become restless. You don't want to get to that point. So that meeting in Cape Town looked at the need to immediately begin to educate the politicians and the structures in the country to begin looking at a credit bureau system. Once you have that, and the education goes out there, now you then have to begin developing an entrepreneurial skill set among the youth. Most of the people, most of the youth, you go to every country in Africa, and I'll use my country as an example, Ghana. You find young people at intersections. They'll come and wash your windows. They're selling all kinds of fruits. They're selling all kinds of stuff that their relatives may have sent them from abroad. It may be a small segment, but you begin to see an entrepreneurial skill set that these kids have that need to be nurtured. They may not continue selling fruit at this intersection. They may then decide that, wow, we have lots of hardwood, so why don't I, if the framework is there to access credit through small and medium-sized enterprises, that money that I get, I can use it to process timber and sell abroad. Or, if you live along the coastline, perhaps I can use that to invest in additional equipment and hire someone to go fishing. So the fish they bring, we can sell. The ability for human ingenuity is endless, given the right opportunity. So this kind of discussion will begin to address the very issue that you talked about. Given a very sizable, in fact, if my memory serves me right, more than half of the population in Africa is made up of the youth. Now that's a very serious trend. What do you do with that? If most of them are unemployed, what kind of security threat does it provide the country? What kind of instability does it provide the democracy that we are experiencing, in Africa? What kind of threat would that pose? If they see others having it and they're not having it, what kind of crime would that provide? And we're hoping that with these discussions, because I will not have all the answers, with these discussions, you bring the policymakers, you bring the businessmen, you bring people at the level of presidency, at the level of ambassadorship, and say, these are issues among many issues that we need to look at, and then have concrete deliverables and follow-up. Not just a discussion. Otherwise, then it becomes another discussion that, I see often in Washington, D.C. But concrete deliverables and benchmarks and timeframes and follow-ups. Because if we don't do that, then the status quo continues. But these are the issues. It's a major problem on the continent. These are the issues that we will address. But to do that, the policymakers and the politicians will have to understand and know what frameworks must we put in place to begin to have a financial system that can allow a young person to first encourage him or her to save money and be able to go to his or her banker and say, well, I have $500 in your bank, in our equivalent currency, local currency. I need money because I'm thinking of doing this kind of business.
What are some of the arguments against having a credit-based system that you've heard, and what are your responses to those?
Good.
And another question I have is what role should the UN play in establishing a credit-based system in developing countries?
Good. The biggest argument what I hear most when I discuss this issue, particularly in America, is, But you see what credit has done to America. People end up with excess credit, they cannot afford to pay, and they have credit up to here, they're in debt. The debt problem is drowning American families, and credit card companies are making oodles and oodles of money, and the credit bureau messes up your information and so on and so forth. And my response always is, we are at a developed stage of a credit system. When it started to provide a mechanism for commerce, for trade, and for people to be able to go to the banking system or the financial institutions and have access to money that they don't have themselves, based on the history of being credit worthy. The advantage we have in Africa is because we know the problems associated with this. We can leapfrog, take the best practices, and try and avoid the pitfalls. That doesn't mean that we can avoid the pitfalls completely, because there will always be folks in the community who will just extend their credit until it's up to here and they cannot, meet their monthly demands. But we have to give benefit of the doubt to the larger population that they will be responsible. Besides, there will be benchmarks. To be able to qualify, you have to demonstrate that you are credit worthy. And we change from where you have to provide collateral. When you go to the bank and you want to borrow money to buy a house, first-time home buyer, they don't ask you for collateral because you don't have one. Back in most African countries, you have to have a collateral of a house, a family home, a car, some cattle, or some livestock, and the best interest rate that most banks will give you may be as high as 20% interest rate. How are you going to be able to compete globally? You see, so these issues certainly drown the negatives of people maxing out on their credit, which is what I hear. And I keep telling them, I said, we've had a developed economy that has gone through a credit system until perhaps the last maybe 20, 30 years, people have really, overcharged their credit because it's everywhere. 30 years ago when I came, there was no debit cards. There were very few credit card companies. Very, very few. Most of us went to CS or JCPenney to get, credit. And those of us who came from outside the US where we've not had the discipline, we maxed out. And then we forgot that we have to make monthly payments. Then they send us letters and they have, companies calling us and at middle of the night and at very odd places. But you learn. You learn. But not everybody did that. Not everyone did that. And the system did not stop it because the system knows that the presence of credit certainly provides a robust economic activity. On the issue of the UN, I'm a strong advocate for the private sector. I'm a strong advocate for a system where you let the market economy work. You provide motivation for people to do what their God-given talent and energies can do for them. You can use the UN and other government institutions and other multilateral institutions to help guide in establishing the framework. You see, but in terms of involvement in establishing various credit bureaus and so on and so forth, you have to let the entrepreneurial juices and the market, economy literally take a lead on that. Because it has pluses, it has negatives. And if you do well, you succeed. And when you see your friends do well, you'll be motivated to succeed. But you can definitely use, the multilateral agencies, to help craft the necessary framework and to provide maybe some watchdog activity, but not direct involvement. Because the UN has its hands full in dealing with other issues around the world. Certainly, that aspect of helping governments craft regulations using the country's nationals who are all over the world with legal expertise, with financial expertise. Tap into them, bring them home and say, look, this is your country, what would you rather have? The way things are now, or would you lend your intellect to this system if we give you the backing to help them craft the framework that will create the kind of economic environment that you wish to see, that you enjoy in your adopted country?
Could you give us an example of one country that you think's on the right track in Africa in terms of these developments? And do you think that country provides any models for the type of economic trade that you're proposing between Arkansas and the African continent, particularly the Delta part of Arkansas, which is a more rural-based economy, and are there options there that present themselves?
You'll have to pardon me if I'm being a little prejudicial here, because to give you a country, the first country I'm going to talk about is my country, Ghana. Not because I think, not because I'm from there, but when you look at the continent, I think among the top tier countries, I strongly believe that what we have in place in Ghana is a very strong model. Of course, it has challenges here and there, has areas that needs to be, fine-tuned here and there, but when you look at the continent as a whole, I certainly will look at Ghana as a good model. I will also look at countries like Namibia and Botswana as good models. There are other countries that are doing well. I will talk about a country like Senegal that I believe is also on the right track. Kenya, in East Africa, the countries that you hear most about, Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, that three-state, they have challenges. They have challenges in almost every continent, in almost every country in Africa. But I believe we have to start identifying, as you asked me, identifying, the best hoped, the best countries that we can hope for to serve as models. We know South Africa, because South Africa has always been an established, economy. It has, its own problems with respect to spreading the wealth among, the larger, black population. All the emerging economies, that you have in North Africa. We talk about Morocco, we talk about Tunisia, you see. But and in West Africa, a country like Benin, very small country, a very small country. But they've exhibited the kind of governance, you see, that although they're small, they're one of the first 8 African countries to qualify for the Millennium Challenge account, and just got funded about 2-3 months ago. You see, so the 8 countries that I just mentioned, the countries that I mentioned, most of them qualified for the U.S. Millennium Challenge account. The U.S. Millennium Challenge account, the criteria, among others, are good governance, rule of law, transparent legal system, transparent financial system, women's empowerment, and a child care program that deals with the welfare, the well-being, the health of the child and its development. And all these put in a potpourri become the conditions upon which the US government will either say that you qualify to be eligible and then eventually get funded. Madagascar became the first country to be funded in Africa from the Millennium Challenge account. And there's another country I will mention, Ghana, Senegal, Mali, Benin, Kenya, and the two countries that I mentioned between Namibia and Botswana. Angola just came out of a brutal civil war, and they are on the path to really seeing some good structural, economic, and structural, social development. So these are the kinds of opportunities that we have, but how do we make sure that they become lasting? The Economist, 6 years ago, had an article, Africa the Hopeless Continent. Everyone talks about helping the continent. The question then becomes, at what point will we sit down as Africans and say, well, we want to engage in direct dialogue, direct discussions about what is it that it would take for us to increase, to improve the livelihoods of our people.
As far as Arkansas business?
Oh, I'm sorry, as far as the Arkansas business is concerned, the Delta area is rural. 65 to 70% of Africans live in the rural areas. And one of the things that I have always advocated is that you create sister city relationship or sister region relationships. You see, I advocated for that when I was at the embassy, by creating sister city relationships. And I think we can do the same thing because we look at the uniqueness of the economic activity around the Arkansas Delta. And for that matter, a number of other areas in the state. And pair them up with comparable locations in different countries in Africa. And not just pair them up and have just visits and photo opportunities, but really put comments, because my driven force is you have to have deliverables. You have to have deliverables. So that the businessman, if it's I understand Arkansas is the leading rice grower, they may even have technology there. So then the question then becomes, if West Africa imported $2 billion of rice in 2001, and about 70% of that rice came from Southeast Asia, then how do we pair up a rice grower in southern Arkansas with a potential rice grower in any of the countries in Africa? So that we move away from only the exports, because sooner or later the countries are going to come out and they say, look, we're not going to import anymore because we don't have the money. And there's donor fatigue, so we have to craft a new approach. So we pair up the grower, the developer in Arkansas with a potential grower or an existing grower, say in Ghana, in Mali, in Senegal, in Chad, in Nigeria, and get them to actually bring part of the technology to grow in those African countries. The market is there. The statistics, when I was at the embassy, the statistics was that we imported in, I believe, 1998-99, close to $2 billion worth of poultry. Most of them from Europe. In West Africa alone. And the bulk came from Belgium, the Netherlands. These are small countries in Europe, but they exported that many frozen chicken wings and frozen chicken legs. You see, before Tyson's and others began to see that there's an opportunity, 1993, I came here to talk to Tyson's when I was living in Los Angeles. that there's a huge opportunity in developing the poultry business in Africa by creating joint venture. Oh, and they said, well, you know, the per capita income is low, but this is low, and as a result, they didn't see the market there. It was when I became ambassador that in 1998 that they went to Ghana. But look at the time lost and the opportunity lost. Meanwhile, the continent, just the sub-region of West Africa, 250 million people alone, was importing close to $2 billion worth of poultry. And that can come from Arkansas. Not only to Ghana, but to the surrounding nations. Same thing with rice. Most countries in Africa, rice is a staple food. We import them from Southeast Asia. You know what we call them? We call them fragrance rice, because they smell good. It's a marketing gimmick. You see, the broken edges of rice they get, we're not qualified for broken edges here, but it's cheaper. It's price driven, it's cheaper. It may have foreign materials in it, but it's cheaper. So now you get a grower, large acreage of land in an African country, and you say, we want you to partner with this company, with this individual. Grow rice, sell. It's a partnership. The business going from here to Africa is protected. Most African countries have signed on to MIGA under the World Bank, with an insurance guarantee, multilateral insurance guarantee, that protects the businessman from here to the continent. Most countries have enacted investment codes that protect the investments coming from anywhere globally in the world into their respective countries in Africa. I know my country has adopted this many years ago, to the extent that no country, no government can appropriate, no country can seize your investments, either through change of government, and I hope to God we never have to go through, military rules, military coup d'etats on the continent again, because it was a major disincentive to business. How do we avoid that? We make our leaders responsible. And you can transfer your dividends, your income, your revenues in any currency, in any denomination, without asking for permission from any government official or the central bank or anybody. There are tax holidays that the investment can enjoy in various categories of business. And the issue then is, with all these advantages, accelerated depreciation, net losses carry forward to the extent that the losses you make now, you can even carry that forward further down when you make money. But the first few years, you will make money, because the continent provides the highest return on investment than any region in the world. These are World Bank numbers. Africa provides the highest return on investment than any region in the world, even outside the extractive industries. But it's also the perception that the continent is perceived as not being safe, too far away. The investor has other options. And as a result, it is not surprising that of total global foreign direct investment of what, about $3 trillion, the continent attracts less than 1%. Less than 1% of total global foreign direct investment of $3 trillion. That's why it's important to have this dialogue.
One more question.
Yeah.
What,
Okay. Yeah. Okay, I'll go to another. I'll go to him. Yes. Can we take two?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
You mentioned perception. What, if you will, what what percentage of the trade policies are governed by prejudices towards the continent of Africa? And how do you correct that perception, those misguided perceptions?
I think that my response to that would be, each country tries to get the best for its citizens. So the one with the best mousetrap is going to catch the mouse, which then means that economics and trade has all its negative sides. So when you look at a television program on cars, one car dealership will say, our car does better than yours, this car doesn't have that, or a refrigeration company or any kind of product that is being marketed will try and dog the other company. The same thing happens at the governmental level. It is up to you, the countries, to make sure that you have the necessary infrastructure and the necessary mechanisms in place so you can compete. Because if you don't have it in place, then the one that has everything in place is going to use that advantage. And that advantage could be negative advertising, it could be positive advertising, it could be medium of the range advertising, but it's just part of human nature, which then translates into government, because governments are controlled by humans and at the governmental level. So it's up to those countries in Africa to ensure that the necessary framework is in place, so that once you have the framework in place, then you can begin to compete. Then you don't have to worry about the prejudices and the negative messages coming from outside. Because before, you see some kid with flies on his face and some guy trying to say, well, give $9 a year, because $9 a year means 40 cents coffee a month or whatever, which is noble. You then take that responsibility to make sure that that family has a full-fledged income through employment, and that you create the entrepreneurial spirit with someone in that community that can employ them, so that the kid no longer goes starving and has flies all over their faces. You see? Yes, sir.
Thank you for taking my question. I have a lot of questions, and if you want to come back again, we'd love to have you. So I'm going to make this a two-part, since it's the last one. First of all, you mentioned several people in the area, in the country, in Arkansas, that have helped make you who you are. Okay, who are you now as a leader, helping them to make them who they'll be? Who are you mentoring that you see as an up-and-coming leader in your vein, and perhaps from your nation or other people? First question. Second question, you're looking at taking a long-term approach, crafting a new outlook on how you're dealing with the development in Africa. I hear you mention economic leaders and political leaders, business leaders. And I also hear you say that people are telling you from this country, in ways you mentioned about your credit bureau, that people here do not see what you see as, you mentioned the credit bureau, people say this is not that great of a thing. Corruption, the problems that we have here is not making us happy. The point I'm trying to get to is that you have many happy people in your country, throughout Africa. Many who are suffering, not satisfied, don't make the living on, and yet there's a happiness within them. What are you doing to involve that which makes people happy now in the development of your country, so that you don't lose that? Because I think that's a big part of why you see in our country, you talk about your young people seeing MTV. They may like the bling or something, but they're not seeing a bunch of happy people. What are you doing to involve the happiness of your people in the economic and growth of your country?
Excellent. I'll take the first question first, and I'll try and remember those questions. In terms of people who mentored me, I believe the best I can be is to give back the knowledge that I've acquired and the motivation that I have and the blessing
to have been in the position to serve as ambassador, because that's an excellent platform. It's a unique platform that makes people listen to you. Hopefully what comes out of your mouth resonates to serve the hopes and aspirations of people that you want to reach out to. So I'm hoping that, you know, the influences I have from the people I mentioned, and I told that countless number of individuals, you know, that invited me to their homes on Sundays after church and all that here in Little Rock, my 10 years that I lived here in Little Rock, that in their memory, not to mention what my parents and my aunts and all that imparted in me in Ghana before I came here, I'm hoping that in their memory, I will be able to reach out and make a difference, and not just the rhetoric difference that you know, this may connote, but a substantive difference, result-oriented difference, that if I can create an impact, it may be broad-based, but it's a broad-based that will impact the lives of that many people that I may never have met. If I can do that, I will have honored the memory of all the people who helped me, you know, and I mentioned Paul Berry because at the time when, you know, I thought everything was hopeless, walked into Paul Berry's office and I was red-eyed and all shut, and he looked at me and said, "Boy, what happened to you? Never met me from anyone." And in 3 weeks, he changed my life around. Okay, that's a major thing. In terms of, and I'm trying to remember the other,
Happiness.
the happiness. See, the argument I always make is that, you know, when you get, you know, this many gray hair, you know, you lose brain cells. So I'm hoping that I haven't lost enough brain cells. But in terms of the happiness, you know, this is a mature economy. They went through growing pains. They went through a period where abject poverty was across the country. You hear of after the war, was it Roosevelt time, one of the president's time, when there was, people were eating out of soup kitchens. There was poverty, abject poverty. There's still poverty in this country. No question about that. Real poverty in this country. But this is a mature economy. And the MTVs and the MP3s and all those things that we see out here, this is the result of a mature economy. It may not make them happy, but the society as a whole has a certain affordability that gives them, in terms of comparison, a better lifestyle than the people on the continent or other parts of the world, or most of the majority of the people on the continent or most of the world. So for that reason, happiness becomes relative. The issue is, yes, we have culture, we have tradition, we have mores that's unique, that helps sustain us in the middle of these difficulties. And I speak strictly about economics. Strictly about economics. I'm reminded by, you know, some former president that I think you all know, that you may know, who said, "Is the economy stupid?" Economy is money. Economy is money. You see, so with the happiness comes the affordability. And the affordability gives you a certain peace of mind. Because if you know you have a job and you're going to get $1,000 a month, and you can pay your rent, buy some food, buy a few clothing for the family, how would that compare to a family in the rural areas or even in the capital cities in most African countries that have to toil under the sun, 90-degree sun, and make $2 a day. Then when the kid is sick, it's a matter of either feeding the kid or taking the kid to the hospital. You go to the hospital, the parent has to pay. Where do they get the money from? So it's relative. And from my standpoint, what mature economies have now, we'll have to go back to what they went through to get to where we are, to where they are. And my argument is, given the wealth, given the opportunities, we can leapfrog the problems, the challenges, the difficulties that most economies, developed economies have now. We can leapfrog it because we'll pick the best practices and use those best practices to help build economies in Africa where the lifestyle of the people will be greatly improved. And if we can do that, then when they become matured and they start becoming, less happy, and they start going to see, the therapists and all those people, then it becomes their problem. But for now, we want them to be able to we want to grow the economy, create wealth through entrepreneurship, through the private sector that is intergenerational. That is intergenerational. And that doesn't resort to give me, or dash me, or grants, or aid. Because as I said in my presentation at the UN back in 2001, aid creates serious dependency, and trade and commerce creates the independency that a community, an individual, a nation can have and become proud in its dealings with its neighbors and others.
Let's thank Ambassador.